Imagine waking up tomorrow with no cities, no cars, no phones, no electricity, no supermarkets, no houses, no civilization at all. Now imagine you're not even sure what's hiding behind the trees. There are predators. There are rival groups. The weather can turn deadly. And if you don't find food today, you might not eat. This was the world our earliest human ancestors lived in. But here's the strange part. They weren't born with everything that makes us human. They didn't suddenly wake up one morning and become the first humans. Humanity was built slowly, over millions of years, one small change at a time. So who were the first humans? And what actually made them human? To answer that, we have to go back much further than written history, much further than cities, even further than the first stone tools. We have to go back roughly 7 million years. Africa. The climate is changing. Forests are shrinking in some regions. Grasslands are expanding. And somewhere in this changing environment, an ancient population of primates begins taking a different evolutionary path. They aren't humans. But they aren't quite like modern apes either. There are distant relatives. Scientists call some of these early species hominids. One of the most famous is Australopithecus, and they were small. Their brains were much smaller than ours. Their bodies were different. But they had something incredibly important. They could walk on 2 legs. That sounds simple, but it changed everything. Walking upright freed the hands, and free hands could carry food, carry babies, carry tools, and eventually make things. But walking on 2 legs wasn't the end of evolution. It was only the beginning. For millions of years, different human relatives appeared. Some survived, some disappeared, some probably interacted with each other, and some may have looked surprisingly human. Then, around 2 million years ago, something important happened. A new member of the human family appeared, Homo erectus. Their bodies looked much more familiar. They had longer legs, a more human-like body shape. And, importantly, they were capable walkers. But their biggest achievement wasn't simply how they looked. It was where they went. Homo erectus became one of the earliest humans to spread far beyond Africa. They moved into parts of Asia and Europe. Think about that for a second. These weren't modern travelers with maps, airplanes, and GPS. They walked across enormous landscapes, through unfamiliar environments. And somehow, they survived. How? One answer is technology. Stone tools had already existed before Homo erectus, but early humans became increasingly skilled at making and using them. A sharp stone could cut meat, break bones, process plants, scrape hides. A tool could turn your hands into something more powerful. But there was another technology that may have mattered even more. Fire. Exactly when humans first mastered fire is still debated, but controlled fire eventually transformed human life. Fire provided warmth, protection, light, and cooked food. Cooking is especially important because it makes many foods easier to digest. That means humans could extract more energy from what they ate. And that extra energy matters when you have an expensive organ inside your skull. The brain. Our brains are incredibly energy hungry. And over human evolution, brain size increased dramatically. But here's where the story gets interesting. A bigger brain doesn't automatically make you human. There are animals with impressive intelligence. Crows can solve problems. Dolphins communicate. Chimpanzees use tools. So what made our ancestors different? One possibility is cooperation. Humans are unusually good at working together, not just with family, with people we don't know. We can cooperate around shared goals, build shelters, hunt together, share food, teach skills, protect children, and pass information from one generation to the next. That last part may be one of humanity's greatest superpowers. Culture. Imagine you discover how to make a better stone tool. You could keep that knowledge to yourself. Or you could teach your child. Your child teaches their child. And someone else improves it. Then someone improves it again. The knowledge doesn't disappear when you die. It accumulates. Generation after generation. This creates something no single human could build alone. A giant chain of knowledge stretching through time. And this may explain something incredible about our species. You aren't intelligent only because of the brain you were born with. You're standing on top of everything previous humans discovered. Every tool, every technique, every language, every idea, every mistake. But we still haven't reached modern humans. Homo sapiens appears in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. At first, there is nothing that looks like an overnight revolution. They are still hunters and gatherers. They still face predators, disease, hunger, injury, extreme weather, and other human species. Yes, we weren't alone. For thousands of years, different human groups existed across Eurasia. Neanderthals lived in Europe and parts of Asia. Denisovans lived in Asia. And there were other populations we are still discovering. Our ancestors met some of them. And something surprising happened. They had children together. That means the story isn't simply modern humans replaced everyone else. It's more complicated. Part of those ancient populations lives on in people today through inherited DNA. So when you look at a modern human being, you're not looking at the end of a clean evolutionary line. You're looking at a mixture of ancient branches. But there was another change that made Homo sapiens especially powerful: symbolic thinking. We began using objects, marks, and images to represent things that weren't physically present. We painted, carved, decorated, buried our dead, created ornaments, and eventually developed increasingly complex languages and social systems. Think about what that means. A rock is just a rock, but a human can decide that the rock represents something. A line can represent an animal. A sound can represent an idea. A gesture can communicate a story. Once information can move from one mind to another, human possibilities explode. You can plan something that hasn't happened yet. You can remember something that happened years ago. You can imagine something that has never existed, and then convince someone else to imagine it too. That's an extraordinary ability. A group of humans can believe in the same invisible idea: a border, a tradition, a god, a law, a currency, a nation. The idea doesn't have to physically exist for millions of people to cooperate around it. And that may be one of the biggest reasons Homo sapiens eventually covered the planet. But here's the twist. Our ancestors weren't necessarily stronger than everything else. They weren't the fastest animals. They didn't have claws. They didn't have enormous teeth. They weren't the biggest predators. In fact, physically, humans can look pretty unimpressive. So how did this relatively fragile ape become the dominant species on Earth? Cooperation, learning, communication, and cumulative culture. One human alone is vulnerable. A group of humans sharing knowledge is something completely different. One person discovers fire. Another discovers a better spear. Someone else learns which plants are safe. Another remembers where water can be found. The knowledge combines, and the next generation starts where the previous generation stopped. That is the real advantage. Not one brilliant human. Millions of humans building on one another. And eventually, our species left Africa and spread across almost every major environment on Earth. Deserts, mountains, forests, Arctic landscapes, islands. We adapted. We invented. We learned. And we changed the environment around us. But there's something deeply strange about this entire story. The first humans didn't know they were part of a great experiment called evolution. They didn't know they were ancestors. They didn't know their descendants would build cities reaching into the sky. They didn't know someone would eventually walk on the moon. They were simply trying to survive another day. Find food, protect their children, stay warm, avoid danger, and keep moving. Yet every tiny decision they made became part of the chain that eventually led to you. Think about that. Your existence depends on an almost unimaginable number of people surviving long enough to have children. Every generation passed something forward. A gene, a skill, a story, a tool, a piece of knowledge, and eventually, that chain reached you. So when people ask, who were the first humans? There isn't one simple answer. There was no single first human. Evolution doesn't work like a light switch. It works like a sunrise. There isn't one exact second when darkness becomes day. The transition happens gradually. Our ancestors slowly became better walkers. Their brains changed. Their hands became more capable. Their tools improved. Their social lives became more complex. Their communication became richer. And eventually, one branch became us. Homo sapiens. You. A species that began as one small population in Africa and eventually transformed the planet. But maybe the most amazing part isn't that humans became powerful. It's that we started so small. A vulnerable animal. No claws. No fur thick enough for every climate. No natural armor. Just hands. Brains. And other humans. And perhaps that's the real story of our species. We didn't survive because one human was strong enough to conquer the world. We survived because humans learned something extraordinary. How to remember. How to communicate. How to cooperate. And how to pass what we learned to someone who came after us. Your life is the newest link in that chain. Everything you know was built on something someone else discovered. And everything you create can become part of what someone else knows. The first humans didn't build the modern world, but they started the chain that did. And the strangest part? That chain is still being built, right now, by you.